DeSci actually, so they launched DickGPT, which is a male sexual health agent. So you can talk to the agent, you can describe different maybe problems that you have. You can do an assessment with it. If you think you have a problem, you can then assess whether you do actually have a problem and what are the things that you can do to address that problem.
This material is for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide accounting, legal, or tax advice, or investment recommendations, or an official statement of Presto or its affiliates.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Presto Research Podcast. As always, I'm joined by Peter, our head of research at Presto.
Hello.
And also Thomas today as well. And we have a really special guest here today, Paul, the founder of BioProtocol. How are you doing today, Paul?
I'm doing great, man. And Peter and Thomas, really nice to meet all of you. Good to be here.
Yep. So I guess as usual, why don't we start with your story? How did you first get into crypto and what made you start BioProtocol?
Yeah, absolutely. So before getting into crypto, I spent a lot of my teenage years in different online biohacking communities. Kind of just like a nerdy kid on Reddit a lot. And have any of you been on Reddit in like in different communities? Yeah. I mean, it was pretty much the same for the early crypto community. Like there was our cryptocurrency and then our Bitcoin, our BTC, our ETH Trader. And so, but before going into those communities, I spent a lot of time in communities dedicated to nootropic research, so like brain health supplements, in other cases like psychedelic research, longevity. And then from there, I branched out into like more obscure topics. Like there was an HIV community that was doing like gene therapy. One of the founders, or like the early moderator in that community, actually then ended up founding Mini Circle, which now offers one of the first gene therapies on Prospera. So Brian Johnson recently took that. And then so I started realizing that there was a lot of overlap between these communities, and in some cases they even got their let's say the substances that they were researching from the same suppliers. In some cases, actually from South Korea, in other cases from China. So basically, people were ordering nootropics, and then in other cases, you'd have a cancer patient community that was almost getting an analog from a similar supplier. And found that super fascinating. Went on and studied economics. And then during my studies, started trading biotech stocks. So I'm originally from Switzerland. Studied in Switzerland. I started trading biotech stocks. And then joined a trading, a trading club at my university. And a good friend that I met there, he was doing an internship at a company called Bitcoin Swiss, which was like the first Bitcoin broker in Europe. So that was like 2013. I then like furiously emailed all of my professors asking them I became very quickly like extremely, as many of us do, like extremely engrossed in like what is Bitcoin? How does it work? I started emailing a lot of my professors and wanted to write my thesis about it. And then joined a lot of these communities as I started doing like a lot of the crypto communities as I started doing research, and saw a huge overlap in terms of this like open source methodology or like open source software that I saw in these kind of early biohacking communities. And then I started my first company working on crypto in 2016, doing a software development on Ethereum and almost offering like Ethereum training courses to some of the larger banks. One of our first clients was Barclays Investment Bank. And that company is actually still running today. It's like it's called Lennon Labs. They employ it's about cash flow positive 30 devs. But I haven't been involved there since 2018. In 2017, I moved on to work at Consensus as one of their first 100 employees. It was a really, really interesting time. It was kind of like the first ICO boom that started in early 2017. And then in mid 2018, I began really maybe some of you remember Ocean Protocol as well. I think they did like a merger with something like Fetch AI. I haven't tracked it so well, but they were one of the first people to popularize the idea of like moving data on chain and like tokenizing data sets. That this was right around the time that CryptoKitties also became it brought Ethereum to a halt for the first time, like the first big NFT boom. And I started asking myself this question, like, hey, what if instead of attaching pictures of cats to NFTs, we instead attach like a chemical data set or like a medical data set and combine that with IP. And then wrote an article in 2018 around using token bonding curves for like IP price discovery. Because I knew from my biotech trading days that like the main thing that you're really trading when you're investing into biotech companies or pharma companies even are like IP portfolios. Fast forward, I then left Consensus and really started building on DeSci in like 2019, 2020. So maybe I'll stop there for a moment.
Wow, are you one of those polymath? Like you majored in computer science and then you studied healthcare and then economics. Okay, but you're like a hacker, so you taught yourself the programming, I guess.
Yeah, well, I taught myself a little bit how to code. I tried my hand at writing Solidity in like 2019, 2020, but I wouldn't trust a single smart contract that I've ever written. But I'm really good. I'm really good at like system architecture. So when I was working at Consensus, my core role was integrations. I was working on Uport, which is like a very early digital identity system on Ethereum. And the core thing to figure out, like the core thing that I did often was to figure out how we would plug into other dApps. I don't know if some of you remember this, but back then there was like 200, 300, 400 dApps. And like I was going out as Uport, and my core role was to figure out their architecture and where Uport's like digital identity system and like wallet design would fit into their architecture and their use case. So like I'm fairly good with high level architectures, but I wouldn't call myself a coder by any means.
Right. Still very impressive background. So yeah. So let's get into the DeSci and bio. Right? And I think so for those people who never heard of the term DeSci, can you like explain in layman's term what it is, and then maybe talk about how bio fits into that landscape?
Yeah, 100%. So what DeSci is really a movement about kind of the dissemination of scientific knowledge and everything around it, right? We kind of have to remember that like science is really like the backbone of progress. The world's largest companies today are all based on like a series of scientific breakthroughs. Even if we think of like the silicon chip or cryptography is literally a science that was funded by the US government during the Second World War, right? To encrypt messages. And that's now today we have a whole crypto industry. And so science is the backbone of GDP growth and progress. It's why typically countries invest up to like 4 to 6% of their GDP per annum into basic research. But this applies more to the US. I don't know how it's in South Korea. In Switzerland, it's quite efficient actually, but like I often use this, like we've kind of outsourced we've kind of outsourced how science is funded to the same organization that like organizes the Department of Motor Vehicles and like issues driver's license. I don't know how efficient that is in South Korea. In Germany, for instance, is also extremely inefficient. And there's almost a 70, 80% overhead. So every dollar that is taken from your taxpayer money that then goes to universities, there's almost like 20 cents or so reaches the scientist. So one of the first ways to think about DeSci is like, what if we could increase that to like a 1-to-1? Right, a lot of the research that is directly funded through DeSci, 1-to-1 goes to paying that scientist, and one of the highest costs that we've often encountered is the overhead fee that goes to the university. In some cases, we've had to negotiate with universities that want up to 200% overhead. Right, so the scientists need 50K, and you have to pay them you have to pay them 100K on top of that just to kind of be able to work with them. And so coming back is like, I think one of the core roles that crypto plays is making things permissionless, right? Permissionless access, permissionless innovation, and letting people fund whatever they want to. And one example where I think this became like one really good example for that is something like HairDAO. So one of the first DAOs that we helped launch was VitaDAO. That was in 2021. And VitaDAO has a really nice overlap between a couple of key things that crypto people are interested in, which is like longevity and like healthcare, like your personal health, longevity, and crypto. So we found a really good overlap there. And then after we launched VitaDAO, we had a whole range of founders, scientists, other people come to us and say like, hey, I want to build a VitaDAO for X. And one thing that came up was HairDAO. And a lot of people early on back then on the team were like, hair loss, like, is that really going to take off? Like, do people really care enough about this? But that's it like, and this is, I think, one of the core reasons of being for BioProtocol. Yes, like a lot of people care about hair loss, but maybe, yeah, right. I am, maybe one day I will too. Like right now I have, if you've been in crypto for long enough, you definitely know the days when you're like, you can like pull out your hair, or like you shower and you're like, fuck. So Peter, take a guess. How much is the current public funding that goes into hair loss, like globally?
I don't know, tens of billions, maybe. No.
Okay, very optimistic.
Maybe, yeah, it's a wishful thinking, maybe.
Yeah.
What is it, like
Anyone else want to
less
guess?
than a billion? Is it less than a billion?
It's less than $1 billion.
Wow. Okay.
It
No
was,
wonder
I think
we haven't found the cure yet.
I think my data is from 2023 or 2023, 2024. But then it was about 5 to 7 million funding institutions for science, right? And we're talking about public funding. We're not talking about private funding. But there's very few actual, like, let's say VC funded startups that are dedicating themselves to hair loss, right? Because if you're a biotech VC, so this would have to get funded by a biotech VC. Who are the LPs for biotech VCs? They're mostly like pharma or private equity related money. And pharma, like, hair loss is not a disease. And so pharma, it just doesn't fall into the purview of pharma. And the end result is, and so I think another funny statistic, 2 out of 3, I think, scientists would change the topic that they work on based on where there's funding, right? And so because there's almost no funding, there are almost no scientists that are working on it. And it remains an issue that is completely unsolved, right? And so if you wanted to start a biotech company in this field, it will be very difficult to get funding. There are a couple of large companies that have, like, do you know Hims and Hers? It's like a pretty large US, kind of novel US consumer healthcare, like telehealth company. Yeah, Mint? Yeah. And one of their most successful products, though, is I think they're selling OTC, like, hair loss pills. But that's all based, and they're making a decent amount of revenue with that. But that's all based on existing innovation, right? And the existing hair loss products on the market, like, I think finasteride causes erectile dysfunction, like, it works, but so, like, choose between not having hair and other parts not working well. Long story short, like, Hairdoll launched with an initial, I think, ICO raising about $300K. And I think and since then has funded multiple studies, has actually brought their first own hair loss solutions to market. So we helped them fund a repurposed thyroid hormone. It was registered as an IPNFT at the beginning of 2023. And it then took them at the beginning of 2024, and it took them about a year to run decentralized trial on it, publish a first paper, and are now selling this in an online store through their website. And the product works really well. And this was all funded by an online internet community. They have a whole range of other products that they're working on. But to come back to this kind of topic of permissionless innovation, like, that would have never been funded otherwise, like, ever. Right. And the previous funding base is like 5 to 7 million. And Hairdow ran up to, I think they ran up to almost like 50 or 80 million. And like, it's currently trading at 30 or 40. They have enough funding to, like, fund a whole range of studies. And so maybe getting to a core piece of DeSci, I think it's the reason why I'm using this as an example. We're building other DAOs like this. DermaDAO, which is going to be launching soon, is another great example of something that is where you have a deep societal need that is underfunded. And on the other side, you can go a direct to consumer PAL.
Isn't there a DAO as well?
Yes. Yeah. So we recently had a really amazing team launch out of Thailand. It's a team of Thai-based doctors. And I think one of the reasons why they quite boldly went into this field is because access to kind of like erectile dysfunction medicine there, or like the kind of also out of the traditional Chinese medicine field, is more accessible, and it's something that is more openly talked about, I think, in circles there. But yeah, it's often, I think, in these taboo topics, also topics that maybe people are a little bit ashamed about talking about, that I think DeSci can shine the most right now, right? Because it's very difficult with the liquidity that exists in crypto today. It's very difficult to compete with a pharma company. The top 10 pharma companies, top 10 or top 20, have about 10 trillion in cash on their balance sheet. And so you're talking about, like, ultimately DeSci is really trying to disrupt, but also enable an extremely large industry, right? Which is like the biotech industry, the pharma industry, bioengineering, engineering more broadly. And so, yeah.
So I'm kind of curious. I guess the HairDAO was a precursor to your BioProtocol, but I would imagine people wouldn't want to just simply donate the money to the scientific cause, even if it's a great thing. So how does that fit into your project?
Like how do the individual projects generate returns, or
What does the guy who who spends their money on BioProtocol gets some sort of reward from participating in it? Is there some kind of economics that works that benefits whoever participates in the protocol?
Yeah, 100%. So ultimately, the core value creation function in biotech or in pharma is the generation of IP. And IP so far has kind of been like, IP still today operates in quite an analog way and in an analog system. And so one of the core missions that we have is actually moving IP on chain and letting these organizations build on chain IP portfolios, right? So you kind of like, they're like Reddit communities with a bank account that can build an on chain IP portfolio, right? And so if you believe that IP fundamentally becomes valuable, or that biotech IP is valuable, right? You're kind of like taking a risk bet that like this specific community can generate valuable IP in this specific field. And now the question becomes what can you do with IP in biotech? There are essentially two ways primarily, and we've opened up a third way. But the first is you do an out licensing. So let's say HairDAO finds a really interesting, or let's say DickDAO finds a really interesting new erectile dysfunction pill, right? And it just like works. Like they do some new science, they fund it, and it works. But now they might still have to take it through clinical trials, right? And the clinical trials get super expensive. So now they can partner with a large pharma company, or even a smaller biotech, and just sell it to them, right? So they hold the IP and they can sell that as an asset. Now the question becomes, and this is not specific to DeSci, the question becomes, how can you distribute those funds to token holders? I actually often think it's kind of like a false question. Is like, I don't think Amazon has distributed a lot of dividends. Now you could ask, like, is Amazon a valuable company or not? I would guess yes. But Amazon also has is very direct to consumer, right? And so the second path here is direct to consumer. So DickDAO actually, let's use that as an example. DickDAO actually, so they launched a DickGPT. Sorry, I can't pull up. They launched DickGPT, which is a male sexual health agent. So you can talk to the agent, you can describe different maybe problems that you have. You can do an assessment with it. It uses some of like state of the art like male sexual health assessments in terms of like how, I don't know, how long are your erections? Like, do you get a hard one in the morning when you wake up? What is your sexual behavior like? All of these things to essentially assess whether you might have a problem. If you think you have a problem, you can then assess whether you do actually have a problem and what are the things that you can do to address that problem, ranging from nutrition to like sleep to movement, or supplements, or even pharmaceutical interventions. And so next to the agent, I think they're deploying this in the coming weeks. They have a dick pill, and they have two types of the dick pill. There's like a normal one, and then there's the dick pill plus. The normal one, and these guys are super cracked. We met them in Bangkok during DEF CON last year. And then they came to DeSci Berlin, and at DeSci Berlin, they already brought us these dick pills that they'd made. And it's going to come in this like super slick packaging. It looks super professional. But the first one is essentially just a combination of different herbs. I think it contained cordyceps mushrooms. It's like a whole range of stuff. And they ran data with it, and it doesn't actually just improve the symptoms of erectile dysfunction. It also improves sperm motility, which is like how fast your sperm moves around. And in one study that they did, it improved it from, I think, 3 million. It's like one count to look at, from 3 million to like 90 million. So like an extreme improvement in motility after like a month. Which was, I think it was also combined with lifestyle changes that was suggested by the agent. And then they have another version that includes tadalafil, which is kind of like Viagra. And they're just going to market with this, right? And so I think this is a quick and easy way to actually, on the one side, address consumers, have a system that like, this was actually an interesting test. I wonder if you could ask ChatGPT the same question. I wonder if it would like respond in a way that is helpful, or whether at some point you kind of hit those errors that you kind of get when you talk about more sensitive subjects with a normal ChatGPT interface. But sorry, Thomas, to recap, one, you develop IP that is valuable enough to out-license. For instance, VitaDAO has two assets. One is called VitaFast, one is called VitaRNA. Both of those assets are in discussion with the Abu Dhabi Ministry of Health to do fast-track approvals for the first longevity-based clinical trials. And in those cases where VitaRNA, for instance, is a novel mRNA-based gene therapy, it's now moving into trials in monkeys. But so they, for instance, are going much more the traditional like biotech pharma route where you have to do clinical trials. And in other cases like HairDAO, like DickGPT, DermaDAO, you're operating in fields where you can go direct to consumer. Yeah. And then obviously that generates sales. From those sales, you can generate buyback and burn models. Or the funds are simply for now collected in the DAO and reinvested into further R&D.
I guess talking more about DeSci in general, I mean, I've been following DeSci for, I guess, a bit. I mean, I participated in bio sales as well. And I also interned at this company called OrbiMed, which was like a bio healthcare hedge fund and VC/VC. But
What was that experience like? I'm curious.
it was tough. I mean, especially the biotech area. It's not something that I could grasp in like a couple of months, right? And that kind of leads to my next question, which is, I mean, at last December, we kind of saw like those, I think it was December or early this year, we saw this Pump Science Euro Riff. And it was like DeSci meta was somewhat coming, but it kind of faded away. So, so why do you think DeSci Summer hasn't come yet? Is it because some say it's like because it takes such a long period of time, whereas crypto attention is very short lived, and also might be somewhat difficult topic for normal people to understand. So, why do you think that DeSci Summer hasn't come yet?
It's a really good question. It is one because it takes a long time. Like science is hard. Science is hard. It takes a long time. And so this is a fundamental approach that we've taken with BioProtocol, which is like have many shots on goals. And Thomas, I wanted to answer a question that you asked earlier is like, what is the role of Biochem in this? So we act as a launch pad for scientific communities, for individual scientists, or for teams that are building scientific agents. And we try to tokenize all of the underlying business models, and we take a chunk in everything that launches. So we're slightly different than other launch pads in the sense of that we curate the launches a lot more. We work on them, but then we take ownership in everything that launches, right? And then then we provide them with frameworks. And that's actually been relatively profitable for us as a launch pad in terms of as a launch ecosystem in terms of building AUM. So Bio's AUM obviously fluctuates with the broader market, but I think at the beginning of the year we were almost like at 100 million AUM, for instance. Now we're back at like something between 20 or 30 million. And then we also act as a liquidity pairing token and generate fees from that, right? So you have all of the different tokens that are trading that we help launch, and we generate typically our pools are between like 1, in some cases up to 3% if something is just launched, but typically 1% or like 0.3% pools. And that actually generates substantial like DeFi income over time. We have a Dune dashboard that's live. But very specifically to your question, like I think DeSci always comes in cycles, and it's often pegged to like major launches. What I really want to see though is like big scientific breakthroughs, and like they actually do just take time. Like that's one reality. So so the big scientific breakthroughs take time, especially when you're playing with small amounts of money. Like you can't, like we would be having, like think about this. Like if you could fund a scientific breakthrough with like 100K, we would be hearing about scientific breakthroughs like all the time, constantly, right? But that's not the case. Like as we saw earlier, like we're barely like, why don't we have a big cure for hair loss? Well, like with 5 to 7 million in funding per year, go figure. And so one, it takes time and it takes large amounts of capital. But I'll give you just one example of so I think one project that could really generate a breakthrough it was funded by VitaDAO, which is this mRNA project that I mentioned earlier. And also the value creation here. It's like VitaDAO initially funded this in 2023 for 80K, and it was like a moonshot. It was a project that was introduced by Pfizer. And we actually have a lot of inbound from pharma companies that are looking at some of the assets that are being developed in the ecosystem, because to them, the assets in the ecosystem are really cheap. And I'll tell you just about like a value creation process here is like, so VitaDAO funded this for 80K, and it owned 100% of the rights. And then the initial data that came back, and it was like let's try this. It's probably not going to work, but it did actually work. And then we did a follow-on financing, but through tokenization. So we launched an IP token in 2024, and that raised how much did it raise? It raised 200K at 1.5 million. Oh no, sorry, 300K or 1.5 million for 20% of the token supply. During that time, the different Euro time, so in December last year, I think it ran up to 30 million. And it's now still trading at 6 or 7. And up until now, all of the, like, that's completely funded the research. VitaDAO still owns, VitaDAO owns about 70%, 10% went to the team, 20% went to the public. VitaDAO still owns 70%. And it's only initially put 80K into it. And the valuation by biotech standards for this like novel mRNA gene therapy is fairly low. And one, they're in advanced talks to get a clinical trial approved. And two, it's now being administered, now being put into monkeys. The initial data that they got back from its human cell cultures is super, super positive, and it's well tolerated. And the scientists, this is obviously the scientist himself, estimates that if this does get approved for human use and it works, it could extend lifespan minimum by like 15 upwards to like 30 years as a novel gene therapy, right? And it's owned by a DAO, and we initially funded it for 80K. And you could go figure if that actually does work, what it would be worth. And so, yeah, we actually receive a lot of inbound from pharma companies who are looking at different assets in the ecosystem that are like, this is actually really good science. How has it gone? Because now it's like 2 years in often. And so I think over the coming 6 to 12 months, we'll see a lot of big value inflection points where like data actually emerges. But it's also one of the reasons why like I realized like we need to have a lot of shocks on goals, and then you kind of just wait. And the alternative to that is what I mentioned earlier, and which is why we're making a super strong push on consumer. So there are many small wins that you can have where you have a product that goes into the market that actually begins generating revenue. And then the model, and then using, like with DermaDAO, for instance, it took us 4 weeks to look at a product from an existing very large pharmaceutical, not pharmaceutical, a skinceuticals company. So like a dermatology company, they make about 5 to 6 billion in revenue. I've been using one of their products for the last 4 years. It's a ferulic acid and then super high dose vitamin C and vitamin E serum. And it was patented. Was patented in about 2010, and then it came off patent in March this year. And we were like, hey, we could just copy that now that it's off patent. We checked the legality of it, and we were like, yeah, sure. And it took us 4 weeks to actually improve the formulation. And now we're using it as a base stack to add further things into. And that product today retails for about $200 to $250. So the one that I mentioned that I've used personally for a long time, it gives you like a glow, and it like makes you like, it's really good for like your like facial aging. It's a really good anti-aging thing. And it cost us in South Korea, it cost us just under $4 to produce per unit. And so that's going to launch through, they're going to finance the further research around it and a first big manufacturing batch and marketing through an initial token launch. And all of the kind of the profits that may be generated from the community, if the community decides to do that, they can implement a buyback and burn model with that token. And so I think these are the smaller wins that DeSci can do, or like the dick pill that I mentioned from DickGPT. If any of those products actually take off, and you take them to mainstream consumers, because they actually do serve a need, right? If you sell a good anti-aging serum and it's already based on existing data and you sell it much cheaper, like that fills a gap in the market, right? Especially if you further scientifically enhance it. And then you can use the revenue that you produce from those things to actually fund the bigger moonshot things. So this is really something that I realized. It's like the moonshots take time. But especially if you're doing them in areas where no one else is funding anything, it's going to work over time. Like it's a matter of time. Yeah.
Okay, maybe we ask the last question and then wrap it. Because do you want to do the last one, or okay, yeah. So then I think your stories is really fascinating, and I think for maybe this space to grow further, maybe more new smart founders can come in and maybe build on the existing kind of ecosystem. And so maybe as somebody who kind of is leading this DeSci trend, looking back on your journey, are there any lessons or advice that you could share with new breed of founders that are entering the this space of intersection of science and crypto?
So I think, especially DeSci, like Web3 founders or DeSci founders that are coming in, I think it's very tempting to, there's so many things in science that need to be solved, right? And it's very tempting to try and work on a lot of different things at the same time and try to solve all of them. So, but this is actually something, because I've been working at DeSci for such a long time already. It's like, so you can, if you only solve funding, then you're going to give money out to, like, let's say, so BioProtocol, we're solving funding, right? But if you really want the IP to come on chain and for it to be permissionless, what you're funding, like, otherwise you're going to fund a company that then ends up as an equity vehicle. And then you're like, well, how is that going to flow back into Web3? And so you need to solve for multiple pieces. But to many founders, like, many pieces have been solved, and some of them the end user doesn't actually care about. So this is something that I often found is like, so I think publishing is extremely important as a use case, for instance. Scientists care about publishing, but like, does it matter if the data is stored in a fully decentralized way or in a centralized way? Like, I'm not sure. The scientist doesn't really care, because right now everything is centralized. And then does the Web3 person care if the data is stored in a centralized way? Only if it was like permanently removed or something. And so there are many things to solve, but decentralization is not always the end goal. I think it's a means to an end. I think there are many things that you can do that are important to do in a decentralized way. But because like so much of science still operates almost like on Web 1 rails, so the patent system operates on like Web 0. like literally you file patents through lawyers, and then you get boxes and boxes of papers in the end from the patent office. And so I think decentralization is important, but it's a means to an end. And especially because DeSci is still a young and nascent field, is like, try to fix one thing at a time and do that really well. That's probably one of the hard lessons we've learned at Bio, is like we've had to continuously almost not stay up to date, but like be at least as good, if not better than the state of the art of other launch pads. And that's something that's really hard. So we've really tried to make the funding experience, for instance, really good and great for participants in our launch pad. But it almost means you need to because those users though are also using many other launch pads, right? And so and we're very specifically focused on like optimizing for science. Our tokenomics are optimized for like those specific scientific use cases. We need to raise funds for each of the projects that they need to deploy. The project need to be transparent about how to deploy those funds. But then at the same time, if you're building anything in crypto, you need to kind of operate at the state of the art of the rest of the ecosystem. Otherwise, like, your users are very quickly get tired and fed up with it. And so if you want to build in crypto today, I think it's extremely important to like focus on one or two or three things initially and do those extremely well before trying to branch out into like also solving other problems.
Yeah, that's very useful advice, I'm sure. I mean, you want to wrap it, or?
Yeah, I think that's it for today. But before we end, for those who's listening and who wants to learn more about BioProtocol, can you share some links or anything where people could find more information about Bio?
Yeah, 100%. The easiest way to get started is just go on bio.xyz. And otherwise follow BioProtocol on X. We also have a bio ecosystem account where you can track a lot of the progress in the individual projects, governance proposals, and so on and so forth. And then if you want to follow me, my journey, it's Paul KHLS on X. That's kind of where I'm most active.
Perfect. Yep, that's it for today. Thanks, Paul, for sharing your insight, and see you all next week.
Peter, Thomas, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.